Hi, everyone. I'm sure people will keep coming in, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to day 2 of the Front Range Industry Postdoc Summit. We're very, very happy to have all of you guys. So before we get started, we just wanted to review a couple of the housekeeping items. First of all, except for the panelists and the moderator, make sure that you keep your audio and your video muted just to save bandwidth. And then the other thing is you'll notice that you can rename yourself, and we have different labels for different people. So all the FRIPS organizers will have the FRIPS label in their name. The industry members will have industry. If you're on the panel today, you can put panel. And then in addition to what we had yesterday, we also have those elevator pitches. And so if you're giving an elevator pitch, you can put EP as your label. And if you're judging an elevator pitch, you can put judge. Now, importantly, if you're none of these things, don't put any label in your name. This is particularly important today because it's going to help us organize people into the breakout rooms when we do the elevator pitches. So if you're not any of these categories, make sure you just put your name and you don't need a label. So like if we don't need like where you're from, or I see someone just put CU Boulder, that's not necessary. It actually just makes it a little more complicated for us. So like for me, I'm a FRIPS organizer, I put FRIPS Ryan Pekarik. And if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, which I'm hoping someone is checking because I can't see it right now. Oops. So if we look at today's schedule, yesterday was very focused on career development, and today we're really focusing on industry insights and talking with industry professionals. So we're going to have an hour-long panel with Keith, Malcolm, and Joey, who will introduce themselves in a second. And then in the second hour, we're going to have 30 minutes of elevator pitches and 30 minutes of networking so we can meet each other and meet our industry participants here. So with that, I'm going to turn off my screen share. And at this point, let's have just our panelists keep their video on. Do we have everybody? I see Joey and Malcolm.
Hello, can you guys hear me okay? This is Joey.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Joey Azafefa. I'm the CEO of Arpeggio Biosciences. We're a preclinical drug discovery company focusing on transcription factors in oncology. My background is in computer science and computational genetics. I did my PhD at CU Boulder with Robin Dowell. I know a lot of the Anschutz folks, so excited to be here today and answer any questions about industry. So
great, happy to have you. I see Malcolm is here too. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Malcolm Davidson. So I did my PhD in material science at Colorado School of Mines. And since then, I've been working for a startup called Citrine Informatics. Citrine's about 7 years old. So I've been part of the journey from when we were 20 people to over 100 people in various capacities, from a research scientist to my current role, which is a solutions engineer. So much more customer facing and really kind of a unique alternative path for PhDs. Really looking forward to sharing some of that experience here today, and great to meet everyone.
Great. I think Keith is having some technical difficulties, but he'll be here in a sec. In the meantime, let's get started. Again, thank you both for coming. So I'm going to be watching the chat, so feel free to, the participants, feel free to ask your questions there. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with a question of my own. And I'm kind of interested how COVID has affected industry and how it's affected hiring in particular. So I guess my two questions are, how has this craziness affected COVID in particular, how your company in particular, and then how has it affected like the job market, especially as it relates to people looking for a job out of their PhD or postdoc?
Malcolm, do you want to go first, or should I go first?
Sure. I am in the process of hiring right now. So one thing that's interesting is I was an experimentalist in the lab every day. And I think there's a lot of people on this call that are familiar with the inefficiencies and waiting and trying to get things done, which led me to go work in software. And software is an industry that I would say compared to other industries has not been nearly as displaced in terms of can we work day to day remotely? Can we hire remotely? In fact, I've been working remote at Citrine since I started, and our team's about 50% remote. So hiring is difficult for the reasons it's always been difficult, finding the right talent, the right cultural fit, things like that. But because we're remote, we also have access to a larger talent pool. We're not tied just to the Denver area. So in some senses, now that more people are on remote, it's been a little bit easier. Obviously, and beyond that is when you're looking at a company through a period like COVID, your funding situations, things like that, there's always questions of stability. Hiring plans get frozen and then they get unfrozen. So when you're looking at your hiring managers, it's also just uncharted territory on trying to say, like, we know you need people. How do we reprioritize that during these new times?
Yeah, and for us, we're also hiring. So maybe this is a good N of two example of a situation where COVID's not affecting folks, companies. I totally agree with Malcolm that from a remote software side, half our company does modeling and software engineering, and then that's been very easy. Two of our engineers are remote and in Boston, so it's been great. But that doesn't mean that you also don't need folks in the lab generating actual data. So yeah, I think that when we've been thinking about hiring in the COVID era, we've been placing a lot more focus on soft skills than hard skills. Not to say that hard skills aren't really important. You gotta know how to extract RNA or do PCR in our case, right? But communication during this time is just absolutely critical, mission critical. Zoom is, as we're all experiencing right now, is a fine platform, but it's not ideal, you know? So coming up with knowing how to write Slack messages that get across the point quickly, but aren't 10 paragraphs, and Slack messages that aren't just like, okay, cool, you know, like really reconsidering how you communicate with your team during this time. And so as we've been interviewing, the soft skills has been really, really important. Does this person gel with this, you know, does this person know how to distill complex ideas into simple statements? Again, with Zoom or anything else right now, that is just so important. So for me, that's how COVID's affected hiring. Yeah.
That's such an incredible point there. With communication through Slack, you really have to learn to expand your sort of sphere slowly because it's very easy to broadcast information quickly. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'll add, and I think for this audience, is there's a lot of postdocs. What a PhD really prepares you well for remote work is you are very self-driven and self-advocating. And that's one of the key things you need to be successful in a remote culture. You've got to be able to prioritize your own work without getting the chance to drop by the water cooler all the time to check in on things. Totally. And sort of trust in the data you're producing instead of sort of those little signals and tells we get from when we're around the office, like I'm doing a good job. So that has definitely benefited me, I think, in this role. And we have quite a few PhDs, and I think we all sort of share that in common. So I would say it's somewhat supported by the data.
Great. That's I'm very glad to hear that you're both hiring. So everyone take note of that for the networking session.
Yeah, please apply.
And I'm sure you guys are both in the LinkedIn group, so you can always contact them separately. So you guys both mentioned those transferable skills, which I think we all hear is really important, like even before COVID, but clearly has become even more important. So if I'm a grad student or a postdoc trying to communicate those transferable skills before an interview, like how do I try to make sure that you know that I have these skills? Is it changing my LinkedIn profile? I mean, how do I best communicate that to you guys so I can get that interview?
It's a great question. I think there are two things I look for in myself actually to determine if the person has the soft skills I'm looking for. If I'm talking a lot during the interview, this often indicates that I'm trying to fill white space, and that's not good, right? In general, you know, in an interview setting, you want to be driving the conversation. You know, obviously the interviewer is asking questions, but if you're kind of just staring at them blankly, and then me, Joey, is trying to like fill that time, that's really not good. So I look for that for sure, just as like a telltale. I don't know if it's in the CV either. We get a lot of bandwidth out of job talks too. I think that's really important, again, to see how the candidate explains their science, and honestly how they respond to questions is a big one too, right? Do they, when you ask a question, is it a thoughtful like consideration of the question and then a response, or is it a didn't really think about the question at all and then just kind of kept driving on whatever point you were trying to make before? Those all to me indicate that that person is either not self-aware, and if they're not self-aware, then working on a team, which is mission critical, right? I think that's the big separator between, and for me, as reflecting back on it, between industry and academia. If you're not self-aware, working on a team is going to be really hard. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I'll kind of answer this from two sides. One is the way I approach this, and then what I've seen being on the flip side of the mirror, so doing the hiring. First, you have to look at the roles you are applying for, and sort of the larger the company, the more bureaucratic, the more you have to depend on your resume and making it through filters and things like that. That was not a game that I was really able to put up with playing. So I looked at startups. And with smaller companies, you're going to submit a resume. They're going to use a screening software, but you're going to have more natural touch points. So it's more accepted to send a follow-up email when you send in your resume to a startup. And now you already have a chance to talk to someone who probably has some decision power there. And that's a great way to highlight things that go beyond the resume. Now, on the flip side of that, so when we hire at Citrine, we have a really standard process that's heavily weighted towards the behavioral interview. It's almost like they're just check boxes for the skills and challenges. But the biggest mistake I see applicants make is there really is no right answer when you're solving technical problems. It's always an 80-20 solution. And they often leave out the bullet points explaining why that was a good decision. Why did they make the decisions they did in their challenge, which is more important than technical accuracy in many cases, because the types of problems we're asking you to answer in a challenge are supposed to be tricky and open-ended. So we look for your ability to break things down, justify certain decisions, and talk about what to do next, really looking for the future. And then beyond that, you're in the behavioral process, and it's a lot of the things that were mentioned by Joey exactly. So can you communicate? Can you work as a team? Showing signal that you have intrinsic motivation to be at a job. Like, of course, it's going to be extrinsically motivated by pay and things like that. But have you thought about, why do I fit with this culture? What is my expansion path in there? Would I really be there for, many years?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's shocking to me how many people we spoke to when we interview that don't actually know what we do, right? Like, it's such an obvious question. Is just like, hey, can you tell me why you want to work at Arpeggio? Or what do you think Arpeggio, our company's name is Arpeggio. What do you think Arpeggio does? Nothing sometimes. It's crazy to me. It's crazy. So that's definitely a no-no. The 80-20 rule is interesting also. I think that's a nice delineation between academia and industry, right? I think as PhDs, we were trained to get to the most accurate and precise truth, right? And to have that be peer reviewed. In industry, that's often not the case. What we're looking for more is go, no-go decisions. It's like, are the sorts of experiments that I'm making going to lead to a very decisive yes or no? Like, follow up on this target, don't follow up on this target. This chemical species bound the target or not, right, in our case. That way of thinking is just very different than saying, well, I wonder if I, did this other assay, I would see this other cool thing, and then you have the luxury of experiencing that rabbit hole. That's not a thing. Yeah, that's a bummer. Don't do that in the industry.
That's a great point. And there's definitely room, if you're a very strong technical contributor, focus in, go deep, but remember to add in maybe a slide or some other few statements about how this fits into the bigger picture.
That's a lot of really great insight. Thank you both. Had a couple of questions. They're actually both really similar, so I'm going to ask them as one. But I've also had a couple of people ask me how to ask questions, and so I'm just going to clarify that. So I'm monitoring the chat. So if you just type your question in the chat, then I'll ask the panel for you. So that way it kind of simplifies things. So I'm just watching it. And so feel free to submit them there. So our first couple questions are about international students. So do your companies offer visa sponsorships, and do you guys hire international grad students or postdocs?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we do. We haven't yet, but we're small. We're 10 employees, so but we're certainly open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a bittersweet topic because we've certainly had to have people who have left the company because of visa issues. I'm not totally familiar with that whole process, but definitely we've hired many international people. We have teams in Europe, Japan, all over. So one of the things I've noticed is that in a lot of these cutting edge jobs, and for instance, we do materials informatics, so helping people design materials with AI, you have to expand that talent pool. It's unrealistic for us to say we're going to source everything domestically. The best applicants are from the international community. Pragmatically, like you also need sales and support and data scientists and SMEs that are in the regions your customers are, so that I don't have to get up at 3 a.m. all the time. So very, very open to international applicants. I don't know enough about the whole visa side of it, except that it's a pain and I support you and I'm sorry.
Great. We got another question in the same vein. Do you guys hire master's students?
Yeah, definitely open to that too. Our current postings are more for research scientists, like research scientists 1, 2, or 3, or principal scientists. We're not big pharma, so they mean very different things to a startup, drug discovery startup. But yeah, definitely. We've hired two, one person right out of undergrad, and then one person with a master's. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We have had employees who were, GEDs and then did boot camps. With software, your ability to learn things on your own is much greater, and I think more accessible than sort of just the physical sciences. And you can demonstrate that you're a contributor with a great portfolio, and it's more expected. So I don't think that a title is a barrier at all. And part of what will make you successful is not to lean too much into sort of your laureate here, and just remember that it's a team effort, and you've got great skills that came from that process. Other people get those skills in different ways.
That is an excellent segue to the next question. Someone asked if they're a biologist, but you can make this broader to any non-computational science, looking to get into a computational role. Are there certain skills that you're looking for? Like if I'm an experimentalist and I'm trying to get a job at Citrine or a computational role at Arpeggio, like how can I guess one, how can I convince you that I would be a good fit? Or two, are there certain skills or training that you're looking for?
Yeah, great question. It's tough. I think that the notion of like getting a PhD in CS is kind of a ridiculous thing anyway, right? Most computational folks, are, especially like software engineers, are like, don't get a PhD in CS unless you want to be a professor. For me personally, actually, my background was in biochemistry and biology in undergrad. I didn't have any programming experience. And so when I applied to CU for my PhD, I specifically sought out a professor who could like shove me into the PhD or the CS department so that I could just get those skills, because I knew I eventually wanted to get there, right? So I kind of hacked my way there. But I think that there's a lot of great programs. Insight Data Science, for example, I mean, they're all over the place now. They put out some great candidates. We looked through a bunch of them when we were trying to source a DevOps engineer for us. And that program is like 3 months or something like that, and connects very close to industry. Another, I think, is when we were hiring for the computational positions, the GitHub repos. I mean, because I'm a technical person, so I looked at them pretty thoroughly. And you can see a lot, you can know a lot about a person by how they write code, right? it's not just commenting, it's just like in general their logic and the way they think, and just what are the tools they're exposed to. And I think the Git repo is a great way to showcase, like, maybe you don't have a PhD in CS or a master's in CS, but you've been hacking on your own for 5 years, and you have this incredible folder file structure indicating all the different things you know how to do. That I think that goes a long way. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been through this process, so I can definitely talk to this. I'll start where Joey left off. One of the main problems is when you self-teach yourself to code, you're not really familiar with how to write collaborative code. You may not even have a GitHub or portfolio. Definitely get one of those. You need 1 or 2 projects there. And what those projects need to show is that you have some execution bias. You made a plan, you executed on it, you have expectations for how people contribute to that. That's going to look really good for sort of these like cross-functional applicants. The other thing I would say is that it matters less the finger on keyboard skill. If you're going directly into sort of an individual contributor role for that, those will be graded more highly. But the real problems I've seen in sort of like applied software development are still just communication. And as a PhD, you're already set up to think critically, break down a problem into tasks. The challenge is not finding people to write those codes. It's the people that can make a project outline. Where is the risk? Where does accuracy matter? How are we quantifying uncertainty? And you can pick up those skills. The boot camps are great. When I originally got my job, I did the self-taught thing, and then I did a boot camp, in my free time along the side to keep the skills sharp. And then I would try to break the thought of a specific language or set of algorithms or things like that. Try to learn the general principles, learn design patterns, learn what makes good code, learn test-driven design. Things like that are more important than just knowing Python or C or Go or something like that. Just the general principles are what will serve you well. And many times that's why there's a whiteboard in a software interview, because it's about drawing out the algorithm more than is executing it in terms of code. I would sort of make this caveat though, that that's probably for something, not Google. Google, they're going to grade you pretty hard.
Good to know. What do you, you both mentioned a portfolio. If I'm trying to start a portfolio, do I have to go to one of these boot camps? Is there a way, like, where's a good place to start building a portfolio, assuming that I know some basic coding?
I think it always comes down to, like, what is a problem that you're passionate about solving, and then you tie your hands and you can only use coding, right? It's like, forget everything you learned about being a molecular biologist or a material scientist in the lab. Like, now it's like, I want to solve curing cancer, but I only know how to code. Like, how do I start, right? And then your GitHub repo starts to manifest around that problem. That's why I think a lot of these like Kaggle machine learning training set things are actually really great, because they kind of give you a very simple problem to solve initially. So I would think about it like that. Like, what's the problem you want to solve? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Necessity is the mother of doing anything. And maybe it's because I'm intrinsically lazy, but when I was wrapping up my PhD, I had so much data and I was like, I'm not going through this with Excel. So I was motivated to write some code to solve the problem. Beyond that, some of the sort of data science applications at the time were going to allow me to do analyses that were really unique and valuable for that project. So, if you have a publicly funded data set or problem that you're working on, that's a great place to start building your repo, because you've got to do the work anyways. Since then, I've sent out emails to former collaborators. I was like, hey, we worked on this 6 years ago. If you're not doing anything with this data and you're okay with it being open, I'd like to do a little project on it and put it on GitHub. So those are good opportunities. If you don't have something like that, Kaggle's great. Good data sets there. I would be careful though that one of the biggest things you'll find in data science is you're never going to get a data set that clean. So doing something with a dirty, real data set is probably more meaningful in your portfolio. I also like that software has figured out that there's more than just your CV to grade people on. I think as scientists, we also have our papers, but building a portfolio is another tool and way to show off your skills that you can link to in that resume.
Great. I really like the idea of tying your hands and just trying to do everything you're doing with whatever tool you're trying to learn. I believe Keith has joined us now after his technical difficulties. Keith, are you with us?
I think you're on mute, Keith.
Oh, I see you.
Can you guys hear me? I just keep getting muted by the host. So I'm here.
Okay. Do you want to introduce yourself? Just say where you're from and describe your position a little bit.
Sure. Name's Keith Giles. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I was a professor at UAB for a while and left to be a data scientist. So that's what I do now.
Oh.
At a company called RX Benefits here in Birmingham.
So someone was just asking about how to build your portfolio and how to kind of transition from an experimental role to a data science role. So it sounds like you'd be very qualified to answer that question. Do you have any further insights that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the technical experience, expertise, interests of the audience is, but you know, if you come from any kind of biology background doing things like bioinformatics, that's a perfect, you know, there are so many data science. Bioinformatics pretty much is just data science in the biology space. So if you're at all close to bioinformatics, you're already doing data science. And so I heard the last panelist talking a little bit about just the cleanliness of data and learning how to apply it to a problem solving, you know, use problem solving techniques and make your work somewhat relevant to whatever the business needs, or in the case of academia, a PI needs. But, you know, bioinformatics is already that. It's doing that exactly. So if you're in that space, you're already there, and learning how to apply machine learning problems to biological questions is a perfect way to build a portfolio. That's very unclean data, very hard to work with, and it'll give you all the skills you need. Outside of that, I think they already mentioned, you can do Kaggle competitions. You can try to predict the stock market like every data scientist has tried at some point. You can try to predict sporting events like everyone's tried. I saw a data science tutorial. Somebody was trying to predict how well players will do in video games like Fortnite or PUBG, the battle royale games where every person has stats. They actually keep them publicly available. You know, those are classic problems that everybody should at least try their hand at. And then you also have, there's a lot of data science for good type organizations. I don't have as much experience with that, but you can get involved and try to work on a problem that might actually be of use to some nonprofit.
And we had another question come in. I mean, a lot of the programming that we would do, you can't make public.
Yeah.
You guys recommend prioritizing projects that you could make public on GitHub, or so that you can like share it, or is it fine to just show, you know, something that you used, you know, non-public data for?
You know, I think that obviously the more you can share, the better. So that's for sure. But in my experience, even if you have, so when I was at the previous company I was at, we hired some students who they did not have they didn't have what I would consider to be a great portfolio. But they had a good resume, and they had even some stuff from a class they took. The important thing was more that they were able to walk us through their work. So a portfolio is great if you can get one, but it's not an absolute requirement, especially I think, and one of the previous speakers said something about, well, that maybe wouldn't apply for Google. I mean, that's a great point. I think you have to make a distinction between, are you trying to be a data scientist in a company that's not really a tech company? That's very different than being a data scientist at Google, Facebook, you know, a tech company. I mean, I can't even speak to that. You have to, most likely, unless you've been living your whole life in the very quantitative sciences, that's going to be tricky. Like if you're not really developing code on a regular basis and know a lot of languages, I don't know. I don't know that you could get hired by one of those places. It's probably not worth putting a ton of effort into it.
Part of what drives that is your value. And I think this audience in this room, and I know this sort of drifted towards the transition to data science for physical scientists, is that the hardest thing to get as a data scientist is subject matter and domain knowledge. And when you have it, you can do things so much faster. Like you understand the data that's coming in the door, that cuts down on conversations with the client. So everything moves quicker. At big companies where you have a data science specific team, you're insulated from the customer in the domain. And then it becomes more about, well, let's innovate on the algorithm. Let's really innovate on things where these are just numbers. And you can be competitive in that space as well. You just need to build a couple years doing sort of outside data scientists than jumping in.
So shifting away from the data science aspect of this, the keynote speaker yesterday talked a lot about how there's really a very small fraction of jobs that are actually publicly posted or publicly competitive. And there's a lot that aren't posted, or there's recruiters involved. So I guess one question to that regard is that true in your companies? But two, how do you access that hidden job market? Should we be cold emailing or cold LinkedIn-ing people, or how do I access that hidden job market?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's really challenging during your PhD or postdoc to prioritize networking. You're just like, I want to get my paper out. I want to finish this analysis. The last thing I want to do is cold LinkedIn somebody, or even probably go to a conference. I mean, thank God you guys are doing conferences like these, right? This is a great. The folks that are here are actively trying to network, and I think that's phenomenal. I didn't do that, right? But during my grad school and postdoc, I had really great friends who introduced me, who were a little later than me, got jobs in pharma, introduced me to my first jobs in pharma, right? So I think that I think to all those points, it really is in many ways about the folks that you know. And that's not to say that folks like me, we're still using recruiters all the time. Like we use, I mean, I talk to like 3 recruiters right now, to find talent. If both for software engineering and again for the translational biology positions. We still take very heavily resumes or reach outs that are through our website. In some ways, we prioritize those because they indicate very directed, specific, like this applicant is applying to our company. I get cold LinkedIn messages from time to time, and I respond to 80% of them. But again, as a CEO, for better or for worse, my whole life is fundraising or hiring, so like this is a big part of my job, right? And last but not least, if I absolutely would take a candidate on in an interview if it was an introduction through a friend or through a colleague. That would mean a ton to me. So yeah, networking is critical. I don't know if there's a class on networking though. I don't know how you teach networking. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, those are great points. One of the things I think we never learn in school is, how do job openings get generated? And usually, there's an annual operating plan that says what teams can hire what. Then they have to go and vie for recs, and then a position opens. So the intent is never to like subterfuge candidates or things like that. It's just that we can't time opportunities. We also can't time when talent comes out. So you never know when there's actually an opportunity there that they're just about to hire for, or maybe it's 2 months out. And if you were the right fit, I think they could move things to really make that happen. So it's always worth talking to people at companies, explaining why you're interested, and just they'll keep you in mind. When it comes to networking, of course, it's incredibly important. I would say you want to kind of draw a line between sort of like intended networking, like I'm looking for a job, versus sort of just maintaining friend groups. And the more you can naturally connect with people and build a friendship so that it doesn't feel like they're just asking you for things, that will help. Totally. So take some time to reach out to people every once in a while with no intent. Just see how they're doing, stuff like that. And that may pay dividends in the future. The other thing I think a lot of people assume is that people don't want to help you. I think everyone I've ever met, they're excited if someone reaches out and they can share their knowledge and things like that. The problem is time and bandwidth. So when you do make an ask or an introduction, just list something that you'd like to get out of that, something that's really easy that they know exactly what to give back to you.
That's such a great point. Oh my gosh. The asking for an introduction, but with no email underneath it, that's like why you want that introduction. Oh my gosh, I can't remember who the CEO of Color Genomics is. It's someone very famous that doesn't really matter. Anyway, he wrote this great blog post that I'll have to find, and I'll put it on the chat, about when you want an introduction from somebody else, provide like an email template underneath the introduction for that person you're asking for the introduction for to give to that person. It goes so long, right? Asking like, hey, Joey, can you introduce me to the CEO of Sumologic? I'll be like, sure, but why do you want that introduction? Or like, and then I don't have enough context to make that introduction. So great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and fortunately or unfortunately, it never stops. I imagine, Joey, a lot of what you do right now is I need introductions to new people for funding opportunities, et cetera. So it's just more networking.
Yeah.
Even within your own company, if there's 200 people, you've got to move between divisions and figure out things. So it's like breathing. You got to learn the skill.
That's a great point. And I don't think that, and to your earlier point too, everyone is super willing to help. Like I personally feel very compelled to help because I've been in these positions before. I've been without a job, or I've been a postdoc and not felt really scared about where to go next, you know, if academia isn't an option. So yeah, everyone is super excited to help. It really does come down to bandwidth and time management, right? So for me too, that one thing I would say, I guess, email hygiene is following up, right? If you don't hear back a week or two after you sent that initial email, like don't just assume you didn't hear back because they don't like you or something. It's 99% of the time because they just forgot, or they didn't star it in their Gmail and it went away. Like that initial second email that'd be like, hey, just checking in, would you mind? That actually works a lot for me. So another tactic. Yeah.
So if I can fuse two questions into one, we've had a few people asking, in industry, are publications the same currency as they are in academia? And then more broadly, probably especially for Keith, who transitioned from academia to industry, can you guys just compare and contrast your experience in industry versus your experience in academia? And in addition, if it's not papers, what is the currency? Why choose one or the other? Stuff like that.
I mean, I could go on and on about industry versus academia for an hour and a half all by itself. I won't bore you with that because it's too in depth. I have too much to say about it. As far as as far as industry, if you kind of leave the biology world, papers have almost no currency. They may help you get a job, but beyond that, they don't have any currency at all. And if you're leaving research biology, they literally have zero currency. People don't even know what they mean.
I mean, I have seen that papers never hurt. Even if they're completely left of field, they do show that execution bias again, that you were able to finish something, communicate it effectively, and that's signal, even if it's not in the domain you're working in. Obviously, like if there's something relevant, like we do value that. Like if you're a real innovator, it does sort of mark that you are a technical leader there. It shows your sort of sphere of influence, which is important. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. Maybe if they're asking about publication, explain why or why not that's been a challenge, or if it's been successful, be able to answer that.
I think I'm going to contrast everything and be like on the spectrum of importance publication, I'll be on. So, and I again, I think this is just very industry sector specific. Pharma or pharmaceutical drug discovery has this very strange hybrid, honestly, between academia and product development and industry, right? Pharma still cares a ton about publishing. And in fact, I was talking to somebody recently at AstraZeneca who was like, yeah, you're not publishing every 2 years, you're not publishing enough, right? And as me and my co-founder have prioritized hiring for translational biology positions, we look for publication records specifically because it indicates a creative thinker. If you're going to drive a drug discovery program forward on a novel target that our pharma field knows absolutely nothing about, a lot of the scientific tools you learned as a postdoc apply, and it's very easy to screen for that in terms of publications. Now, I didn't publish in, Nature Medicine during my PhD, so I don't think you need to worry so much about the type of publications, but not having a publication during your postdoc or not having publication during your PhD would be a red flag for me. And I probably would, at minimum, we would spend 20 minutes talking about why that occurred during your interview. Yeah.
The other thing that I think falls into this topic frequently is, will I ever get to publish again? And actually in industry, there's a lot of opportunities to publish. You may not be able to get justified time to work on it, but if you'll put in the time, there's always somebody trying to get a paper out.
Great, that's really awesome. It's good to hear the kind of the differences in the different areas. We got another question. Can you guys kind of describe, I mean, the transition for either from grad school to industry or postdoc industry is always like very difficult for a lot of people, and how to do that is really hard. So can you guys each describe kind of how you left your position pre-industry to your position in industry, and when you knew it was the right time? How long were you applying for jobs? Those kind of things. Like, can you just describe that for us? We can start with Malcolm if you want to start.
Sure, I am probably the closest to that sort of asymptote. So about 6 months to a year before I was going to wrap up my PhD, I was really looking for jobs. And before then, I was pretty career-minded the whole time. So somebody gave me some advice once that was, the PhD is a means to get a job, and don't forget that. So I was always thinking about what I wanted to do next. And at that 6 month mark out, I realized you could sort of leverage having a job offer lined up as a way to sort of get your committee on board to get you out the door. Because if someone else believes in you, they can believe in you. So what I moved into was a very research-centric role at Citrine, and almost like a postdoc phase. And one of the biggest things that changed there is you're expected to grow a little bit more as a bit of a people manager, not just an individual contributor. So it's no longer just about how well you contribute. That's important. You should work on that. But also, can I make a good use of my teammate in the infrastructure to drive success on a project in like a predictable manner? From there, that has only increased more and more. So when you're good at something, I find that you're rewarded by being able to lead projects on it more than actually getting in and sort of writing code or running reactions anymore. And that was a really eye-opener for me. Learning some basic management skills, project management skills, a bit about delivering value and quantifying timelines is really, really important.
Go Keith, sorry.
Oh, I actually have to drop. I thought this went till 2:45. I apologize on my local time. I would say that, the last thing is that for me, it was there's no one point. It was a journey that just kept happening. I was in academia a long time, and I had a lab for 6-7 years, and I never once was like, this is the only thing I want to do. I always kind of had one foot out the door. It took a lot of effort. I had some abortive attempts at getting into management consulting, and that, I guess if I had one message that I can end with, it's hard to leave academia and get into industry. It's not easy. But you just got to keep trying. And at least my experience is any indicator, once you kind of are in and you have a job, I feel like I get job offers like constantly. When I was in academia, that never happened. So I think that it's just helps to know that if you're trying to leave academia, it's hard. You can do it. It's hard. You just have to keep trying.
Yeah, and I would add there to the last bit. My experience was emotionally the job management and the project management softwares was absolutely mission critical. We use Asana, and which is basically kind of like a Kanban board, effectively, but it's a really nice translation between like software Kanban, kind of general coding, and in the lab project management. In academia or your postdoc, you don't have to manage yourself, right? When you're working in a team, you have to manage your coworkers, you have to manage your communication. If you have people that are underneath you have to manage them specifically. and you have to keep track of where all the moving pieces are. That does not exist during your PhD. So it's a great lesson to learn, though. And by the way, I'm still learning it. Like, I don't think there's no way I'm an expert at it. So yeah.
It's really interesting to me. I guess we always hear about how hard it is to break into academia. I've never heard someone say that it's hard to break into industry, but I guess that's what we're here trying to do.
I think that it's just a different mindset, honestly. It's less about individual creativity and sitting in the closet and coming up with something novel, and more about working in a team. You know, it really, I would 100% hire somebody who's like, if there's a spectrum of like 0 to genius, and then a spectrum of like 0 to Gandhi in terms of social intelligence, I would much rather hire somebody who's on 80% on the genius scale and a 99% on the Gandhi scale than a 99% on the genius scale and a 80% on the Gandhi scale, right? Like, it's so much better to hire somebody who has high emotional intelligence and is good at their job, is technical, like they know how to pipette or they know how to code, than it is to hire that genius who thinks that everything they do is fantastic, right? You don't want to be that person. That person won't work well in a team. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask
It's so eye-opening how I found that the technology is like the smallest barrier in industry to getting a solution across, because you're working with stakeholders for who's purchasing the solution or the funding body, and you spend a lot more time communicating and justifying what's going on than ever thinking about solving a really hard technical problem. A lot of times that does come up, but it's by far the smallest barrier.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask this next question verbatim because I think it's really good and really interesting. I'm looking to be involved more with decision-making, strategic planning, and have more influence in general in my career. But in my current directory, this takes several years. How do you have advice on getting from a postdoc to roles with influence? I'm assuming startups are probably the place to look. So how do you make an impact is basically that question.
Malcolm, you want to go first? I got to think about this one.
Sure. You know, that was certainly my strategy. Startups, very shallow sort of like management hierarchy. So even if you join the team as an IC, there's probably only 2 or 3 layers between you and the CEO. So by nature, your work gets seen more, and that has benefits and also can be sort of bad sometimes. But the first thing I would say is a lot of us want things, and then we never talk to our managers about what we want. And it may be as simple as just talking to people about, hey, this is my aspiration. Can you help me get to that? And a good manager should find some opportunity over time. What I found is that, again, you have to bring them what you want usually, though, which just shifts the onus back on you to figure this out again. But I would socialize it. You want to balance how quickly and rapidly you're expanding this. So pick one project, try to be a bit more of a leader there, because there are leaders on that project currently. And you're playing sort of this game of dynamics of, I don't want to interrupt what they're trying to do and things like that. And eventually you'll sort of find the happy path where you're growing and what you're good at, and people start to respect that and look to you for sort of more strategic decisions. And then the last thing you have to wrestle with is you may need to make sort of a paradigm shift. It may be faster to leave sort of the lab bench and the tech skills behind to grow as a manager. It's very hard to grow in both of those ways for a sustained amount of time. This is something I'm experiencing right now. Point. And it's not easy to let go because we love the science. We love doing the technology, but at some point you got to kind of pick your horse and get in the race.
That's a great point. I was talking to a manager at Google a couple of years ago, and he was saying that the rule of thumb is every 2 years you transition between being a manager and going back to being managed, I suppose, and just keeping up to date on your technical skills. Because, and I'm starting to experience this too, like it's very challenging, especially in very technical industries like ours, to lead technical people and not have that background, right? The last thing you want to be is somebody who doesn't know what CRISPR is, and you're telling 10 scientists to edit the hell out of all these different cell lines, right? Like that's that's the last thing you want to be in. I was really trying to contemplate if the question is, I want to be in roles with more responsibility and leadership. Number one, if that's truly what you want, you're going to find no problem with that in industry, because everyone in industry doesn't want to make a decision. You know, I make decisions constantly, all day long. I'm decision fatigued. Whenever an employee or I'm a coworker of mine comes to me and they're like, Joey, I think we should do it this way. I'm like, great, yes, let's do it that way. You know, so, and maybe that is because we're in a startup, and maybe that is because I just have to make so many decisions. But I think that to be a good leader, you have to be vocal about your opinions, not be opinionated, just be vocal about what you think is the right solution, and then provide that solution. And if you do that enough and your solutions are relatively good, then yeah, over time, you just become a manager, you become a leader. You know, a lot of my colleagues who didn't even postdoc, who got PhDs in MCDV at CU, and then went to work for pharma, many of them now, and they've been, you know, 2 of them are working for Merck right now, already have 3 or 4 technicians underneath them, you know. So I think, again, just getting your foot in the door of the industry, and then, yeah, maybe you need to wait a year or 2, but you'll find that people will start to fill out underneath you. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a practical advice. Some of the things I did is I started by asking for mentorship opportunities. And then once I'd sort of done that a few times, then it's, can I get sort of endorsed management opportunities where there's sort of direct responsibility. And then before too long, then you're really looking more at like sort of the HR side of management and things like that. One thing that I think is really helpful to learn about is a lot of organizations are shifting away from line management to functional organizations where you have a lot of cross-functional teams. The way you lead and make decisions there is totally different. And you really want to practice aligning people. There is no more yes or no toggle switch. It's 80% of the group was mostly aligned on this approach, and I'm ready to defend it when the other 20% pushes back. So that's something to think about, and how you might maneuver those situations, or just early on, try to get some experience. It doesn't have to be in your job. If there's things like this in your life, leverage that, learn about it, learn about critical communication.
Thanks. This has been really, really great. Just a reminder, if you're participating in the elevator pitch competition, make sure you put that EP in your name. And I think we've run out of time. So I really want to thank all 3 of our panelists, even though Keith has left us, for participating. And I'm sure, if I may put you on the spot, I'm sure that they would be happy to answer questions. There's a lot more questions in the chat that we weren't able to get a chance to ask. So I'm sure that you can reach out to them separately and practice that networking.